In this Wild Running podcast, we interview Sian Longhthorpe, formerly known as Simon, who is currently undergoing a hormone replacement program as part of her gender reassignment. We discuss the power of running to deliver resilience and consistency for someone who's going through such a huge personal transformation. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, the sun's shining, which is always a good
Oh,
start.
it's lovely, isn't it? I just went out for a run in the mud. It was an absolute joy. So, Sian, I'm really interested to interview for this podcast series. We know each other because we used to run together, and you were at Torbay Athletic Club, and I think you still are, you know?
No, I haven't been with the club now for about 4 years, actually.
Is that right? Sian, I just want to speak to you about the journey that you've been on. Incredible, quite experienced. The last, is it 2-3 years?
Yeah, it's been what feels like a lifetime journey that's really gathered pace and really come to the forefront in the last 4 or 5 years, maybe. So yeah, happy to share my story, really.
Okay, Sian, so obviously a lot of people would be interested to know, first of all, there's a lot of parallels. And we will obviously go back through your journey, which is a long one. Since this is essentially a running podcast, there's a lot of parallels between self-identity as a runner and self-identity just as a person, as a human being. And I guess that, running for a lot of people would say, especially during lockdown, it gives them just that sort of sense of identity, confidence, reassurance. It's a common theme in their lives. How would you draw a parallel between, the journey that you've been on?
Yeah, I think I fully recognise the importance that running's played in my life. I've been running now for more than 3 decades, and people know me as a runner. It's quite often one of the first things that people mention, particularly if they haven't seen me for a while, is how's your running going? So running is a huge part of my life, always has been, and I think I recognise now more than ever that it's one of only a few constants in an otherwise very different life. My life has changed dramatically over the last couple of years. I began living full-time as a woman just over 18 months ago, but getting to that point has been difficult, but I've always had my running there to help me through. And running for me is an opportunity to get clarity of thought. It's amazing the decisions that I can make when I run. It just brings such clarity to my thinking, and also a confidence actually to be able to make those decisions. And I think actually I'm a lot more confident when I'm running than outside of the running environment.
Yeah, right. That's interesting. And obviously, when you were a competitive runner, you were known as Simon, and you used to finish regularly in the top 3 in local races. And I think you found that you've wanted to sort of play it quite low key, haven't you, since you started racing again? Tell me about that and why you decided to do that.
Yeah. Transgender is quite a hot topic at the moment, particularly in sport, and I think it's a really difficult issue to wrestle with, and I don't envy the governing bodies trying to make decisions, because whatever decision is reached will be deemed unfair either in the eyes of transgender athletes or cis females. So it is a very grey area. For me personally, I accept and recognise that I've had the highlight of my running career. I'm now 43, and even if I hadn't embarked on this journey, I probably wouldn't be as fast as I was. So in effect, I've had my prime, and maybe that influences my thoughts on this. But for me, running now isn't so much about competition with others. It's more about what running does for me. And I haven't raced properly for the last 3 or 4 years, really. I was racing very regularly before then, to the point of 2 or 3 times a month when I was in my prime. So, what running means to me and what I look to get from it has changed. That said, I have entered a couple of races this year, which I hope will take place. But I've been quite selective about the events that I enter, and they are effectively races where the organisers know my history and or they have a very clear transgender policy which aligns with where I am. So yeah, I personally don't want to go upsetting people by running, and hopefully my approach will be seen as a compromise as much as possible.
Yeah. Have you been accepted by the running community? I suppose it is a community. Have you been accepted, and how have you been accepted?
Absolutely, I've been accepted, both in day-to-day life, but crucially within the running community as well. It's interesting because before I came out and was still living my former life, I would on occasion present as Sian and would go along to running races, and I would be stood next to people who I'd competed against for years and years, and they wouldn't know who I was, and I kept it secret who I was, and I just went there as a spectator just to really stay close to the running scene. Since then, when I've come out and gone full time, I am Sian now, and only will be Sian. So for me, it was about reintroducing myself to the running community, and they have been wonderfully accepting. I think particularly the people that I get to speak to and explain the journey I've been on, I think they recognise this isn't something that one does lightly. It is a life-changing journey that I'm on, and it's not being done for reasons of being able to compete in races. For me, it was much more than that. People have been very accepting of the decisions I've made. I don't think necessarily they understand why, but I can't really expect them to if they haven't been in my situation. But actually, since going full time, I've made some new friends through the running community, both online and in real life. And one friend in particular, a very great friend of ours, Joe, who we both know. Joe has only known me for less than 2 years now, but has only ever known me as Sian, and has become my best friend. That's the power of running, and the power of a shared enjoyment in something. Coupled with that, really, I've now got an Instagram account that's up and running, and through that I've been accepted onto the Asics Frontrunner scheme, which gives me a platform to promote running and all the benefits that does. And hopefully by sharing my journey with people, they can better understand transgender people and what we're all about, and hopefully just be more accepting of people, and allow for better cohesion, really.
Yeah, I mean, we both live in Devon, which is probably not the most diverse place in terms of demographics in the UK. I guess that you having strengths to come out and speak about your identity change,
Absolutely,
yes, is gonna change people's perceptions of themselves as well, because I guess it's like holding up a mirror to people, right? Some people who might be unable to grasp the concept of someone having a physical change or a gender change, but also their own prejudices, I guess.
I really hope so. You're absolutely right about the demographic within Devon, and I'm acutely aware that growing up, my family's friend base and subsequently my friend base was pretty much exclusively white, middle class, heterosexual people. And it's only in recent years that my eyes have been opened to a far wider community out there, and I just hope that people see what I've done and actually can embrace difference, because what I've always been keen to stress to people is that I'm the same person that they've always known. I just look a little bit different on the outside, and I think people generally get that. There is some misconception within the media and within society generally as to what transgender people are all about, and what we're trying to get out of our lives. But for me, it was about essentially leading the life that I wanted to lead as Sian, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to do that, and it's not an easy journey, and I'm sure there are countless people who look at what I've done in awe, really, because they're not able to do it themselves. But I hope that people see that what I've done is possible, and it may be a different issue that they're wrestling with. You know, it may be that they're gay, it may be that they've got other issues in their life that they don't want to deal with, but hopefully I can demonstrate that, you know, that there is a way forward.
Yeah, and quite often, if for somebody to make a decision such as you've done, I mean, we'll talk about the timeline in a minute if you're okay with that. I guess it takes something quite cathartic, like a cathartic experience, to sort of spur you to make that decision finally.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many obstacles, you know, both societal and, you know, within your own family to overcome. But for me personally, I got to the point of realising that I had to do this. It was something that I tried unsuccessfully to bury and pretend wasn't there. But there was a realisation that I was hopefully only halfway through my life, and actually it was within my power to make that change. And it needed a catalyst, and we can touch on that later as to what that was. But I realised that to be happy and to get a sense of completeness, I needed to take some very difficult decisions. And those decisions haven't come without consequence, and transitioning has come at a very high cost. But I still firmly believe it was the right decision to make. And I know it sounds very vague, but the key test for me is to look in the mirror and see you smiling back at me, and that's enough for me.
Yeah, well done, Sean. A very brave one. So, I mean, a lot of people would be interested to hear what your timeline was like. I mean, in terms of your life's journey and thinking, I don't feel happy in my body, to thinking, all right, I need to do something about that now, to actually making the change. Can you take us through that?
Yeah. So you'll not be surprised to hear it's a long journey, and we'll go back to my childhood really, when age 8 or 9, I remember trying my mum's shoes on and lipstick and earrings, and knowing that wasn't typical boy behaviour. But remember, this is pre-internet days in rural Devon, where I just didn't have access to the information that's out there today. So I knew something wasn't right, I just didn't know what it meant. And then forward through to my sort of teenage years, and there were feelings there still of an enjoyment of wearing women's clothes, but still not really understanding what it was all about.
Yeah.
And I went off to university, was leading a typical male life. I met a lovely girl who would subsequently go on to become my wife. And in the back of my mind, I had these feelings, but they were very much only a small part of my life, and it was something that I genuinely felt was manageable, and that I would be able to have a typical 2.4 children lifestyle, and that's what I aspired to. And I married Kim, and everything was fine. I still had the occasional feelings of wanting to dress, but it was something that I could control. Fast forward again a number of years, and it was the birth of my son that was really difficult. And unfortunately, you know, that was the start of a wedge being driven between my wife and I. And we unfortunately divorced. We divorced about 2 years ago, but we separated about 5 years ago. And it was the separation that gave me time to be myself and reflect on where I was in my life. And I realised actually that what I thought were feelings that were a small part of my life were actually wanting to run riot and take over. And for the first time, I had opportunity to fully indulge that, living on my own. There was still a deep sense of shame. I recognised it wasn't normal, it wasn't typical, and I was very fearful of how the truth would be received, both by my friends and family, but also within wider society. And I really wrestled with this for a good couple of years, thinking, how do I move forward? I've got a failed marriage behind me. I've got strong desires to be Sian, but there was just no way I would actually be able to be brave enough to step forward. And it was actually the death of an old school friend of mine by suicide, who had some mental health issues of his own, and his death made me realise where I was in my life. And I saw at his funeral just this outpouring of grief from his friends and family. And I remember thinking, I can't put my friends and family through that. And I've been to some very dark places, but I realised that that wasn't the route that I had to go.
Yeah.
And that was the catalyst that I needed to take some very difficult decisions. And the following day after learning of his death, I went into work and confided in HR that I was transgender. And that was a huge relief to just open up to somebody other than the handful of friends that I'd spoken to, and to be well received.
Because what did you do for a living, Sian, at the time?
So I worked in the house building industry.
Yeah.
At the time, I was working for a private development company. Unfortunately, I was made redundant last summer.
Yeah. After what, 20 odd years, wasn't it?
After 16, 17 years, I was made redundant, which was really difficult to take, and was one of the high cost of transitioning that I mentioned earlier, because I have no doubt that my transitioning made the task of getting a job that much harder. It shouldn't do, and my skill set, should shine through. But unfortunately, working in the construction industry is hard for transgender people.
Yeah, quite a male environment, isn't it?
It is. I'm office based largely, but I do go out onto site, and I was in the situation of needing to find work, as we all do, and it was a really scary time. I really feared for what the future held, but actually that was a fairly key test for me, because it made me realise that actually, despite the difficulties that my decisions had brought, I still knew it was the right thing to have done.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I was successful in finding a new job at the end of last year, which I've now been in for 3 months, and I'm pleased to say it's working out really well. So
yeah, I mean, it didn't take you long, because I remember when you just finished with your old job, and it wasn't that long before Christmas, was it?
No, I mean, I was fortunate that in the end, there was a 2-week gap between formally finishing my former job and starting my new one, which I personally think is a huge reflection on me as a person, and actually the challenge that I faced, that I was able to, successfully navigate a really, really complex task. So yeah, it was a huge relief, and I'm so pleased. And after a really turbulent few years, I'm hoping now for a few years of stability and just enjoying where I've got to. So that's the plan. We'll see if life goes that way.
How do you feel now in day-to-day life? How do you feel now compared to when you were Simon?
I'll not sugarcoat it, because there are really difficult days.
Yeah.
There are lonely days as well. I miss company. I get to see my children regularly, which is great, but the rest of the time I live alone, and there are some very lonely times. But that said, when I step back and think what I've got, I am just so pleased. The fact that I can live this life in a lovely part of the world, in a house that is just my dream house, with a job that I'm happy with, and with friends and family supporting me. It's amazing.
I was going to ask you about that, Sian, about how your family has reacted, and how your family has treated your decision, and have they come to terms with it now?
Yeah, it's been a really difficult journey for them. It was pretty much 5 years ago that I confided in my mum and dad that I was transgender, and at the time they both really struggled with it as a concept. My dad particularly admitted that it just wasn't on his radar, and he just didn't understand why somebody would have these feelings. And it's fair to say, for probably 3 years, my mum and dad, and my brother to some degree, really struggled to accept my true feelings. And that was against the backdrop of me still presenting, for most of the time, as Simon. I think a key turning point for them was when I made the decision to go full time as a female. And I think it was at that point that they realised actually this was it, and that they had to say goodbye to Simon, and that that they wouldn't see him again. And it's been described as a grieving process, which I think is a really accurate description, because they had to say goodbye to Simon, and none of them wanted to. But at the same time, they still had me in their life, and they needed time to adjust to that. And I'd like to think each time they saw me as Sian, it became a little bit easier. And, I'm in a wonderful place with them now. My mum and dad refer to me as Sian. They get the pronouns right. Cards that I get from them for birthday and Christmas say daughter. And it's those sort of things that just mean the world to me. And, it's been a really rough journey with them. And for many, many, many years, we didn't talk about it. It was the elephant in the room. But eventually we've come good, and I'm so grateful that they've stood by me and supported me, because not every trans person has that luxury. And I think in reflection I've realised that it's so much harder for family than it is for friends. Family have been with me throughout my entire life, whereas friends come and go and only see you for a snapshot of your life. So I don't think I really gave my family credit for what I was asking them to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you have brothers, sisters?
Yeah, I have a brother, Andrew, who's also a runner.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because he was very fearful that I would be this different person who wouldn't want to go running with him. And that's not the case. We're able to meet up still now and do a lot of the things that we used to do. And I think that's made it slightly easier for him as well.
Yeah.
If I'd gone off and become a completely different person, I think that would have made it so much harder for them to deal with.
Okay. What about the emotional journey in terms of the physical changes that you've made, and presumably the hormonal changes? Has that had an impact on you emotionally? I mean, I guess it must have done.
It really has. I've been on hormones now for about 3.5 years. It's been a long journey medically, and still a long way to go. But unfortunately, the NHS process is hugely overwhelmed at the moment, and it's taken 3 years from being referred from my GP to actually now being treated by the NHS. So in those intervening years, I took it upon myself to fund HRT privately, and that brought about a whole raft of changes, some physical, but emotionally, which is what you asked about, has been really interesting to see. I suppose there's a sense of calming, whether that's psychological, I don't know, but I do feel more at ease with myself. I feel less angry than I used to do. I used to be very bad at bottling things up, whereas now I tend to let things out, and I'm able to share things with people more easily. But also my emotions are a lot more extreme, I feel. For example, watching a film, I am very easily brought to tears, which is no bad thing. I think it's great to be in touch with one's emotions, but it's certainly something that's fairly new to me.
Yeah. It's funny, I'm actually more likely to cry watching a film than my partner is, I think. So I don't think that's a gendered thing necessarily, but I hear what you're saying. So let's go back to running and the differences in physicality. And you were telling me quite recently that you notice a big difference in running times, but also presumably your running style as well, to a degree. Would you say?
To a degree, certainly my performance levels have really dropped off, and I knew before taking hormones that would be, that would be an effect of them, and I fully accepted it, and I fully expected it, so it was no surprise. It is quite a traumatic change that I've seen. I'm not training as hard as I used to be when I was in my prime, but I do still I run regularly, and I'd say it's probably at least a minute a mile slower than I used to be.
So you would have been in your heyday, Sian. You would have been, just to let people know who don't know you. You were probably running 32-minute 10Ks at one point, weren't you?
I was 32 10K, 2:35 marathon. I now wonder whether I could break 3 hours for the marathon, so that kind of puts it in context. I'd like to think I could just dip under it, but from day-to-day training runs, it is about a minute a mile slower, which for all of the runners out there on your podcast will know that's a big difference. I used to, my marathon pace of just under 6 minutes a mile, if I could do one of those now, it would leave me absolutely gasping.
Yeah.
It's something that I knew would happen, so I'm absolutely fine with it. There has been a period of adjustment, and that's probably still going on now to some degree, and I've had to rebase what I'm happy with and what I find acceptable from a run.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because having been a good male runner, I think it's only right that I would still be a pretty decent runner in the sort of female category, and that brings us back to the conversation we had earlier about, is it fair for me to compete as a female? Semenya, that's different again, but it has really brought to the fore the debate around hormonal impact on athletes and the benefits that testosterone afford to athletes. So it's an interesting debate. I personally feel very bad for Semenya, but it's not a black and white argument. There are very, very many shades of grey in it.
Yeah. So just to recap, Semenya's pretty much was hounded out of the sport. Yeah. She carried on competing, but
she's carried on competing, and it's gone to the highest levels of the arbitration for sport. If I'm correct, the imposition of new rules have made it very hard for her to compete in her favoured events, which I think is really unfair, actually.
So you were in charge of athletics, the hierarchy. What would you do about that? I mean, and in terms of race directors as well, would you encourage them to introduce another category for transgender runners?
I think that's probably the happy compromise, to be honest. There is an argument that if people born male are allowed to compete openly in female sport, it's going to eradicate female sport completely, and that is, on the face of it, a very hard situation to argue against. There's been a lot of talk of it in the media recently, and the research that's been carried out that I'm aware of points to the huge benefits that testosterone give to genetic males, and that impacts different sports differently. I think running, particularly long distance running, is probably one of the least impacted sports, and compared to the likes of powerlifting or strength sports such as rugby. But it could be argued that there is still a benefit to be had. And
there could also be an argument that the longer you go, the more of an advantage it is to be female, i.e. Jasmine Paris.
Quite right, yes, yeah. The issue is, and I'm always keen to not talk on behalf of transgender folk generally. I can only talk from my perspective.
Sure.
And what I believe. And as I said before, it's coming from someone who's had their heyday, so maybe that's putting an unfair spin on it. But I do see the difficulties in the people that were born as a male competing openly. Is a third category the way to go? I don't know. That there are issues of potential discrimination if you go down that route, and I'm sure there's a whole raft of transgender athletes that wouldn't be happy with that approach. So it's a really difficult one for me. Competing in races at the level that I'm doing it at now, where it's more about personal pride and personal performance rather than monetary rewards or competing for your country. I think it's probably less important. The races that I've chosen to do this year, I've been selective about, and I think that's probably what I'll continue to do going forward. but that probably doesn't work for everyone, and certainly doesn't solve the problem.
Right, yeah. I'm sort of interested to know as well, go back to your experience of running. Say you were to do an event and you enter an event as Sian and you look back to when you entered an event as Simon. Would you perhaps have had a different approach? Like, for example, it's well documented that a lot of men are more likely to go off too fast in an ultra race than, say, women are. And it's been largely put down to ego, although it might be attributed to diet as well, but that's another story. I was going to ask you about diet as well, if it's changed. Those are two things I'd be interested to know.
So in terms of tactics and ego, I think it's quite interesting that I was always renowned for starting slowly, working my way through the field. So whether that was some female traits coming to the fore, I don't know. Right. But I was always, when I was racing way back when, I would never go off too quickly. It was a tactic that worked for me, and therefore I stuck with it. And certainly my marathon PB was obtained going with a mythical negative split. It's the only time a marathon's fully worked out for me. But yeah, I think ego does quite often get in the way of male races.
Yeah, interesting. It's obviously an interesting time for you to sort of come into the sunshine, if you like, into the open. Speaking on a national level, after Brexit and people being worried about nationalism, people being worried about racism and Black Lives Matter, and all these sort of traits that of commentators have identified as being unhealthy characteristics of the age we live in. But on the flip side of that, there's a lot more awareness and also a lot more, you could say, a lot more of a consciousness. Would you say that is the case? People are more conscious and also more forgiving, I suppose, of people who want to make a choice about their own lives and their own identity?
I think so. I mean, I think society has moved on in recent years. I'm not sure I would have been able to socially transition 10 years ago. I think there has been a shift in that sort of time frame. I think people are far more aware of transgender within society, and I think people are probably slightly more accepting. I'm aware that I still live probably in a slightly insulated bubble, and that there are people who would have a real issue with what I'm doing, either because they don't understand, or they don't want to know, or they've just got some prejudices that they've not fully addressed. But undoubtedly, there will be people who take issue with the journey that I've embarked upon. That said, I really hope that people see what I'm all about and can understand to some degree why I've done what I've done. I mentioned before, it's come at a huge cost to go down this route, and it's not something that I've done for superficial reasons. This is deep-seated feelings that I felt I had to address, and I hope that when people realise that, they might not understand fully, but I hope they will accept my decision. An issue I'm trying to address with myself is, I don't necessarily want to be the poster girl for transgender people. Yeah. But at the same time, I think I've got a really interesting story to share that I hope will help other transgender people and also help general society to see what we're all about. And for me, it's about getting on with my life. I don't want to stand out. I just want to walk down the street and blend in and not have people take issue with me.
Fairly understandable desire, but identity is a complicated thing, isn't it? Because there's the way that we see ourselves, and then there's the way others see us, and the way we'd like to see ourselves. And I guess that we have a lot of things ascribed to us by other people, but you've chosen your own identity, which I guess is going to be shaped in years to come by your experiences. But deep down, you've always known what your identity is. You just haven't quite formed it. Is that true to say?
Yeah, I think so. As I mentioned earlier, for years I was deeply ashamed of it, and therefore, I deliberately didn't engage with it. It does feel like a second coming, really, in so much as I've got a blank sheet, really. I was able to start again and say you knew me as Sian, but this is me as Simon. And, you know, fortunately, other than how I physically present, I haven't had to rechange things drastically. You know, what interests me are largely still the same. And as I said earlier, my running is still, you know, integral to my life. What I look to get from running has changed slightly. I'm no longer chasing the times and chasing the PBs as I used to, but there is still that competitive streak in me, and it is still a useful way of socialising. It's a useful way of staying in shape. I think it brings about a certain discipline to one's life and structure.
Yeah.
So, you know, injuries permitting, I don't ever see myself going away from running, and I'm just able to take joy from different aspects, whether it's offering advice to some runners who've looked at what I've achieved and picked my brains.
Yeah.
You know, that gives me a huge sense of achievement. Or, you know, helping out on your running camps where, you know, I get to meet other runners and tell them about my running past and ask about theirs. And there are so many different ways for me to now get pleasure from running. So it's been nice that, you know, as my life's adapted, what I'm looking to take from running has adapted, but it's still really an important part of my life.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that you have helped out some of my camps, and I've always noticed that people find you very approachable. People have commented on it, and that you seem to be interested in people. I just wonder also if you kind of bring another awareness, because you've had two identities, so to speak. So you can identify with men, you can identify with women, and I just wonder if that makes you more approachable in some ways.
I certainly hope so. The camps we do are always great, because the people that go there's already that shared loving of running, so you know straight away that you've got something in common with them. You know, we're fortunate that we get to run where we do. We've got some fabulous routes down here that, you know, many people aren't blessed with. So I think they come down and they see the world that we're in, and they want to get to know you and me and the other guys and what we've done in our running careers. And for me, it's been a really useful way of putting myself out there and testing myself, really. Because for me, it's a confidence thing, getting to speak to and meet new people. Because I'm a very self-conscious person, and, you know, generally lacking in confidence. So to push my comfort zone by meeting and guiding people who I've never met before has been a really useful learning curve. And
yeah,
you know, ultimately, I'm equally happy telling them about me and my running and my journey, but also asking them about their racing and, you know, what they are looking to get out of running. So they're always enjoyable weekends.
Okay, well, I've really enjoyed sharing your company on. I was going to ask you, Sian, about, just finally, just before we wrap up, you have, as you said before, you have been chosen to be an ambassador for Asics. What does that include, and what reason did they give you for choosing you to be an ambassador?
No, I had some lovely feedback, actually, and it was such an honour. I found out, well, coming up on 2 weeks ago now, actually, but it was only officially announced last Thursday. So I am now one of the Asics Frontrunners, which is a global network of runners of various abilities, disciplines, and various walks of life. And the idea is that we seek to motivate and inspire others, particularly to get out there and do running or exercise. And the angle at the moment is the benefits that running can bring to one's mental health. And I'm such a firm advocate of that, because during my lowest years, I was really struggling mentally to deal with this and to work out where my future was.
Yeah.
It was such a difficult decision, but my running helped hugely with that, and I was able to deal with my issues much better by running than I would if I were to sit at home and dwell on them. So I think running has been so helpful for me over the years, and you know, that was part of the submission that I made to be a front runner. And I think I have got a unique story to tell. You know, I was a pretty decent runner and the fact that I'm no longer looking to achieve that from my running, yet running is still so important to me.
Yeah.
I think is a really important message to share. And, you know, it was interesting when I was at my lowest mentally. I was at the peak of my physical powers, and I was achieving my PBs in my late 30s when the rest of my life was crumbling around me, and it's because running was my saviour, really. I would go out and train, and I would train hard because it was a distraction from all of the other issues that I was facing in my life.
Right.
Because I was training hard.
Yeah.
I was getting the results, and because I was getting the results, that was giving me just a little bit of a lift, which was what I needed. So it was such a help to me back then, and even now, that there's still an awful lot of issues for me to deal with, and I find going out for a run is the best way of dealing with those. So the idea is that I will join my other front runners and spread the love of running. Hopefully just inspire some people. And my Instagram is an interesting mix of fellow runners and other trans people at various stages of their life. And, probably many of them are struggling to fully accept themselves and come out and deal with things. And I hope that by me being given a platform, I can show them that it is possible. And I won't sugarcoat it, but I will show them that there is a life, and hopefully that will help their decision making moving forward. So I'm really pleased to have been given the opportunity.
Yeah, well done, Sian. I've known you as Simon, and I've known you as Sian. It's been great to see, the way you've handled it has been very graceful. Been amazing to see how well you've handled it. Anyway, best of luck to you, Sian, and I'll hopefully meet up with you for a run sometime soon.
Yes, let's do that. That would be lovely.
All right. Many thanks for taking the time to talk.
Thanks, Mary. Take care.